Hello everyone, welcome to the online version of this week's activities for Teacher Research Project A, or EDFGC 5810. Focus of this seminar, which is based on the face-to-face seminar for this week, is this. The learning intention is for you to develop an understanding about research and develop the ability to draw links between teaching and learning and approaches of investigation in the context of practitioner research. And your success criteria is to formulate some potential research questions from examples from your previous placements and also identify some basic methodological considerations in respect to potential research questions. So we're going to jump right in. And I want you to take a moment just for yourself and probably pause this recording. This subject or this course is called Teacher Research Project A, and I want you to think about what is research, what's your perception of research, and how would you define it. So take a moment, I want you to actually jot down some of your thoughts. So pause this recording and do that now. Okay, I'm guessing that you have paused it. Your first task for this week, given you thinking about research, is actually to, and this is a bit of a fun and hands-on thing from an idea from the Ballarat version of this subject from summer school. I actually want you to draw a picture or make a collage of pictures of what you think a researcher looks like. And I want you to post that on this week's forum. Now, I know that Tanya has already done her picture because she joined us in the online session. But for the rest of you, that's your first task. Incidentally, this actually connects to quite a famous study that you may be familiar with or not, called Draw a Mathematician, which involved researchers looking into students' perceptions of mathematics with the idea of looking at tapping into aspirations, etc., etc. But certainly drawing a picture of your perception of something is actually a really valid form of data collection. So that's your first task. I'm not going to talk all that much more about it right now, but consider if you need to annotate it, particularly as you're not going to be talking about your picture per se. You probably need to unpack it by writing some of the things that you're illustrating in your picture and how this fits in with your idea of research. So what is research then, and how do we do it? Well, it's actually something we do all the time, and this is your second task for the week. I want you to suggest a situation where you've undertaken some research, and I want you to share this as a posting on the forum for this week, and also respond to a peer. So give me an example of the type of research you do in your everyday life. It doesn't have to be at all connected to teaching, but something you do. For example, I've done some research about various holiday options and what's going to be the best time to do a particular thing, and what are my different choices in respect to cost, etc. Well, that's a form of research. You might be doing that in respect to banking or health insurance or real estate. It can be to do with investments, or it could be something that you want to undertake a healthier lifestyle or something like that, and you're investigating diets or exercises or gyms in your vicinity. So that's your second task. Come up with a situation. You don't need to write a particularly long description of it, but certainly I'd like you to post it on the forum and then have a chat. So by now you should have thought about research, and you've tapped into your thinking about what research might involve. And quite often we might think of something quite scientific that involves us in testing a hypothesis, looking for the truth. Well, actually research is a lot of the time more about asking more questions and looking at different ways of understanding quite a complex reality. Now, in a Dictionary of Education Terms by Griffith and Kowalski, they talk about research as a systematic and methodical study, an inquiry or investigation used to solve a problem or to add or extend knowledge in a particular area. Now, looking at that, there are going to be some key words that probably jump out to you. Certainly, the idea of something that is systematic and methodical is important when we talk about research, because it fits into a tradition of investigation, whether it is a quantitative and kind of a scientific objective approach, or a more emerging approach where it's fine to be subjective and find contextual understandings that are relevant for a particular teacher or a particular classroom context. It's equally valid, but it does fit into a wider tradition, which means that we constantly make references to that tradition, if you like, as we justify our choices. So we inquire and we investigate something that is a problem, and it's probably quite a defined problem. A lot of the time it's so much better to keep it very, very focused and quite specific, rather than be too ambitious, if you like, and try to find something massive, because even though the world is complex and our knowledge is complex, in order for us to actually gain some insight that is meaningful, we need to be very specific in what we're looking into. And the aim is certainly to extend our knowledge in a particular area. Now, we could do this in respect to extending knowledge to the teaching profession in general, which might have almost an evaluative dimension in what we're looking at. But probably more relevant in your context is to find something that's really meaningful to you, to extend your knowledge as a teaching professional. So please come into this course with that in mind, that you are the key person in this. You're looking at becoming the best teacher you could possibly be, and you're using this methodical approach to inquire and investigate an issue that's relevant to you to gain that insight. And this means that we need to reflect a lot. So what is reflection? Well, Sellers, or Maura Sellers, defines reflection as the deliberate, purposeful and metacognitive thinking and or action in which educators engage in order to improve their professional practice. And that's what you're doing here. You're using it's an extended reflection, and you're doing a lot of the groundwork here because you're finding out key ideas that inform you in respect to investigating and putting forward a plan of investigation for this research question that you're going to come up with. You're not actually going to investigate it as part of this course, but if you're doing Teacher Research Project B, that is where you're going to conduct your investigation. Nevertheless, the two link together, and even if you're not doing B, you're still coming up with some quite detailed and well thought out plans of investigation in this subject. So looking back at Wilson then, which is your set text, she talks about research and teaching in respect to teachers constantly reflecting. I mean, we do that as part of our normal life as teachers. We look at the classroom interactions and we question why students behave and perform in a particular way. But to understand why things happen the way they do, we need to take a step back, have some time to reflect and deliberate more explicitly about practice. Some of this, when we talk about why students behave and perform in a particular way, may prompt us to identify particular instance where this is a problem that we're trying to overcome. It can also be times when it's particularly successful. We've done something that's worked particularly well and we want to find out and think about why did that work so well and generate an understanding from there. So both ways work and both can generate some really meaningful understandings. Oh, sorry about that. My email, actually you probably can't hear it. It was a noise that just popped up. Scratch that. Anyway. So what this then requires is the conscious management of thinking and activity. And that's where that methodical approach fits into how we investigate something. This means that we learn about theories and codified explicit language and that's where we tap in to previous findings, previous studies that are similar and that lend us insight into our particular chosen topic. We engage in activities to make explicit tacit knowledge, and that's when we start investigating the issues. And here, in fact, even the preparatory work for research in respect to conducting a literature review and engaging with different studies and formulating plans of how we're going to investigate this is a form of you engaging in activities to make tacit knowledge about how to investigate teaching quite explicit. And we justify and develop new knowledge, and we do that constantly. It's a key thing that we do when we investigate our practice. We put forward the reasons why we've decided to go about our approach in a certain way, and we fill in the loop. So it's not a matter of right or wrong, it's a matter of you explaining why you've done something and you're relating that to existing knowledge. So that's where you're relating it to other references. That's how you show your engagement, in your critical engagement with literature that informs you as you justify and make those connections. And you subject new ideas to critical scrutinies of other practitioners. In this particular subject, you're doing that both in respect to your presentations to your peers, which are coming up quite shortly, and you're also doing it as part of your writing exercise, and later on when you actually investigate your issue, you're sharing it with colleagues, you're sharing it with your peers, and you get feedback and ideas in return. So that critical scrutiny builds your knowledge further, just like any feedback and feed forward does. So if we then look at this conscious management of thinking as well, that's the same slide as before, so I'll just leave that. This leads us to the next task that you're going to do, task 1C, and again, this is something you're going to share on the forum. I want you to think back to your last professional placement or your professional experience, or even the one before that if that's better. And I want you to try to think and identify 3 lessons, if you like, 3 insights that you gained or realizations that you made. Probably examples of times when that made you question your teaching, made you reflect as a practitioner. It could be something that went really well, or it could be something that went wrong. I want you to think first, so kind of rack your brain for 3 examples before you articulate one. What was it? What was the situation? How would you describe it? How did it come about? And what did you do? How did you react? Who was involved and where did this happen? Was there a particular context? And why? What made it? Why did this occur? Why did it make you question your practice? What did you do in order to find out? So just use this as a prompt to identify something that you can actually formulate as a research question. Now think of 3 examples first to kind of rack your brain for various illustrations of your practice, if you like, before you decide on one that you're going to share. You don't have to go in that order of the questions, but the idea is that you kind of unpack something that prompted you to reflect on your teaching. Put it forward as a question. Now, obviously, it's a really good idea not to have a closed-end question that will be a yes or a no, but to try to articulate a research question that you could actually investigate, which was prompted by this particular incident that you're sharing with us. So that's your 3rd task. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do is look at some of the EITSL discussion questions. Just going to minimize this. I'm actually going to stop this first just to show you the questions that you're going to be doing. Now, the questions are up on the forum, just so you're aware of it. And they are taken from, if you follow that link, you will actually get to the teaching standards. Obviously, you can't follow the link from the video clip, but you can follow the link from the slides. Now, what I've done is from those National Teaching Standards focus areas or discussion questions, I've articulated these as questions for you to read through. And you can see that sheet. Now, your task is the following. First of all, just look at the first bit there. I want you to read all the questions that you've been given, which are there. Decide on a question that you think you might be interested in, that you think could be investigated as part of teachers' practitioner research. So just look through those questions. Again, you've got everything ranging from How do you cater, I'll just make this larger actually so we can see. How do you cater for the needs of specific groups and individuals? How is it possible to observe whether students' physical, social, intellectual development is affecting their learning? You've got a whole range of questions here. So I'm not going to read them all to you, but these are your questions. And again, they're taken straight from the EITSL standards, which means that it actually connects very nicely with teachers' professional practice. So just pick one that you think, that you reflect on. So I'll just make this nice and big so I can see what I'm doing. Once you've decided on that one question, I want you to construct a mind map where you put that question in the center. You articulate, you can use it directly from the EITSL discussion questions, or if you want to rephrase it, because the idea is to jog your brain and to think, what could you actually investigate as part of your practice? Now, please be aware that this isn't obviously, whatever you do here is not necessarily at all what you're going to investigate later on. At the moment, the aim is just for you to start reflecting on possible questions that you might investigate as part of this subject. So start by articulating as a question. Put that question on your mind map or your concept map. Then think of, and this is up in that purple circle, what would be the purpose of that sort of research? What would you hope to actually achieve? Because that would fit in with your aim of your research that you would articulate at the beginning as you unpack your research. So it's a similar structure that you're going to use as you develop your proposal and as you share your research that you're deciding to focus on. To whom would this topic be important? So who would be the stakeholders? And only pick ones that are actually really relevant. Who would be involved? Who would have an interest in this? And you should definitely have a big interest in this as a pre-service teacher. How would you go about investigating this in respect to the design? What would you do to seek information? Would there be a particular setting? Would there be particular sampling considerations in respect to certain students that you might focus on in order to find out this question? So what are some of those considerations in how you would actually investigate this? What sort of evidence would you seek, which helps you identify different types of data that you would collect? So what would it look like? What were some of the considerations associated with that? And how would you analyze that evidence? What would you actually do? Now, I know that this is, further on that you haven't thought about this yet, but just start trying to map out what are some of the things you would see, because this is essentially what you're going to be doing as part of your first assessment, and this is essentially what you're going to be doing as you present your research as part of your first assessment task in that presentation. So construct that mind map, unpack it, and post it on the forum. That's your next task. And obviously this is then an introduction to your first assessment, where the purpose is for you to demonstrate some critical engagement with research that's relevant to your chosen topic, that fits in as part of your professional practice. And you're required to prepare a draft, which is a draft, so it's a bit of a rough version, if you like, of a research proposal. And in particular, you're going to connect it to both good teaching and learning, why you've chosen it, so you're going to justify it, but you're also going to indicate some of the literature in respect to the key ideas that inform you. And that's something we're going to look at in the next few seminars, but just so you're aware of where it's heading. Now, the way this is structured is, first of all, you're going to do a brief presentation that you're going to upload on the forum, as I've said, so you'll be narrating it, or if you want to have a recording of it, that's fine. But it needs to be uploaded to the forum on by the 24th of March, and it's 5%. You've got the marking rubric in the course description, so you see what your focus is. And essentially, it is the same thing that you're looking at in your written draft proposal. It's just a verbal version of it. And it's a version that you're going to get feedback and provide feedback to your peers on. So that's part of your criteria. Again, you're giving feedback to your peers' presentations, and as an online student you will be viewing the presentation that would have been uploaded the day before, and then you will post feedback. You can use the template I've given you that's on the forum to give feedback to your peers so that they get some input, preferably some more questions, give them something to really think about to expand that thinking for the proposal. So that's due on the 25th of March. And then quite a while later is when that written proposal is due. About 2,500 words where you articulate your research ideas. So I'm just going to have a quick squeeze at the course description. So what you're doing as part of, and again this is up in your description, but just so you're aware of it, if you look at the marks you can see that part 1C has got an emphasis in how the marks are allocated in respect to how you identify the topic and explain the significance for your own professional practice. So you really need to put yourself in there, explain why you've chosen this, how it's going to help you become a better teacher essentially, and what the problem, the question, which should be phrased as a question, the aim and the objectives are outlined. That fits in with what you're doing in your presentation as well. It's the same thing, but you're doing it in written form there. Then you're going to present an outline of the key ideas that inform your research. That's your literature review. That is where you explain what other people have found in respect to this. You're not going to do it one after another in the order you've read them. You're going to do it in a thematic way because it's organized in respect to the key ideas that inform you. And within those ideas, you position the different scholars. You compare, you contrast, and you relate it to how that informs your thinking. So that's a big emphasis in this first assessment. And you also identify, again, another big issue here, identify the gaps and tensions and the problems that arise in the literature. And in fact, when you find quite contradictory or conflicting positions taken up by scholars, you should embrace that because it really gives you something to talk about. You can really make those comparisons and contrasts really clear and then position yourself. So actually, when you find different ideas, it's a great thing for you because it really helps you articulate the gap in understanding or the tension in understanding. You will also put forward some plans of how you're going to investigate your chosen topic, a bit like that mind map that you're doing as part of this week's tasks, but you're doing it in a written form. Briefly consider some ethical issues and then also reflect on how your feedback from the peers have informed your critical thinking as a final, almost like a conclusion thing at the end of it. I will upload some examples of literature reviews because I know, where I suspect, that some of you have done them more recently than others and some of you may not have done them. So it's quite handy to have a look at what it might look like. So you will get some examples. They're actually from a different university, but the idea is the same. So you can have a look at that. Then you're going to be drawing on all that thinking for your second assessment, where you build on. So you're not going to scratch what you did in the first part. You're going to keep building on it. So you will submit large chunks of the same text you're submitting as part of your assessment 1C, but you've developed it and you've probably tweaked it and elaborated it a lot more because, as you can see, your second assessment task is 4,000 words. So it's a lot more juicy, if you like. But the emphasis, again, if you look at the marks in the marking rubric, the emphasis in the second assessment is, yes, you're building on all the literature you've got, but the emphasis is also that you're providing some detailed plans of how you're going to investigate your topic in respect to the design, your sampling, your methods to collect data, your methods to analyze data, and a timeline. Basically, all those bubbles that you're supposed to start thinking about as part of your online task this week. But again, you're doing it in a detailed form. You will also explain your ethical considerations as part of that second assessment task. So that's how that fits in. And that's a big proportion of your marks for this subject, but as I said, you're drawing on the work you've done previously as part of the first assessment. And I'm going to go step by step for you. Now, I'm not sure how familiar you are with searching for literature. Again, I've put some hyperlinks in here, which give you an idea. The idea is once you're starting to decide on a topic, that you start looking for it. A really good way of getting access to various articles and books, of course, is the library. You can go through Google Scholar, you can go through EBSCOhost and all those search engines and data. The words escaped. Anyway, that gives you access to the articles without you having to pay for it. So make sure you go through the uni library as you search for the sources of information that will inform you. And we're going to do that more next week and keep on going. I want to give you a suggestion of a journal which is really quite helpful and handy when we're looking at teachers' practice. And it's a US journal, a monthly publication called Educational Leadership. It's written in a very conversational tone, short, sweet articles, and it's thematic. So each month they have a focus on whatever it is. And it's a really good lead-in because they're very prominent scholars who write for this. Highly renowned, it's peer-reviewed, but it's written in a very easy way to understand, and it's written explicitly for a readership of teachers. So you can find the connections to practice very nicely. So I'm just flagging that as an example, and if you go onto the slides and click on that hyperlink, you'll get straight there. And once you get to it, I would suggest that you click on for example, EBSCOhost. So you click on one of these, I keep forgetting the word, never mind, you know what I mean. So if you click on that, and you search within a publication. So click on, there's apologies about the search terms being confusing here. You click on the search within this publication, and then you're going to enter your search terms. If you look at the small blue font under, you've got educational leadership, you've got and literacy and instruction, which are search terms I put in as a Boolean phrase there. You've then got basic search and advanced search. When you click on advanced search, those windows will pop up for you. So click on advanced search, and that way you can narrow your searches. If you look on the side, you've got limitations there. You can limit it to full text, you can limit it to certain years if you just want to look for within the last 5 years or so. For this journal, you don't need to click that it's peer reviewed because it is, but otherwise if you're just putting in general phrases and you don't know which particular journal you're looking, if you're not limiting your search to a particular journal, you would want to click that to make sure that you get the full text and that you get peer-reviewed sources. And it's a way of narrowing down your results as well, by changing the search terms, by doing an overlap and search. And certainly the library has got some really good both workshops, and they've got Moodle sites, etc., that help you with academic search. Now, if you find, I want to also flag that a lot of the time we think, oh, we need papers that are only 5 years old. And yes, if we want something topical, 5 years is generally the rule of thumb. You don't want to go older. But when you search for key ideas, it makes sense that you also include some seminal works. Seminal works meaning works that are probably a lot older, but that really have influenced the field. They're widely cited, and a good way of finding out whether something is seminal or not is to literally just put it in Google Scholar, and you will see how many times it has been cited. So if you're finding a reference that's 20 years old and it's been cited thousands of times, yes, it's going to be a seminal work. Whereas if it's 20 years old and it's been cited 15 times, probably not that important, particularly as a lot of those 15 times are probably by the same person who's trying to get their publications, or drawing attention to their own research. So that's a way of indicating it. And certainly when you write about it, you might say Bandura's influential idea of social cognitive theory, for example, and then Bandura 1986 as a reference to what you're talking about. That's just an example. Anyway, another little hint, which I'm going to talk about later, is once you find a really good scholar that you want to investigate more publications from, you can search either later publications that cite the same article, same paper that you found within your EBSCOhost, for example, And you can also find older versions of it. You can, by looking at the references and then go back to the references that are cited in that article you're looking at, go to that source, because they might have quite a different interpretation. So rather than falling into the cited by trap, go to the source if you think that's going to be relevant for you to get insight. And that's also a way of getting access to some of those seminal works, which are really handy to include in your literature review. This is an example of what it might look like when we then start talking about it, because when you unpack and contextualize the key ideas that inform your study, you're not just going to talk about findings, you're not just going to cite names of people who've investigated the issue, you're going to include methodological details which indicate how they investigated it. And this little example, which is accidentally from Educational Leadership, is quite a handy, I think, a good example of what this might look like. So they're providing a context of the study. Keller and Just used imaging to examine the brains of struggling readers before and after they received 100 hours of remediation, including lots of reading. So we know what they've done. We know that they've done imaging to get these understandings, and then we find out what they found. The white matter of the struggling reader was lower than the structural quality of good readers than before the intervention. But it improved following. So we know that's a key finding that have then influenced the people who are writing this particular paper that we're reading. Then they're doing a comparison to other literature. They're talking about numerous other studies, and then they're naming them, have supported Keller. So you're doing a comparison there. There's a connection. Have supported Keller and Just's finding that comprehensive reading instruction is associated with changed activation patterns. Then comes the interpretation, which is important, because this is where the people who are writing this position themselves and explain how these ideas relate to the study in question. These studies show that it doesn't take neurosurgery or banging away at basic skills to enable the brain to develop the ability to read. It takes lots of reading and rereading of text that students find engaging and comprehensible. So that's an example of some of literature they've reviewed that is informing them, and that's partly what you're going to be doing as part of your first assessment, but that's a bit further beyond. I just wanted to share it and also share that as an example of the sort of text that you will actually find in Educational Leadership, for example, which is quite easy to read, it's easy to comprehend, and it makes the idea of engaging, because once you've decided on your question, which you need to do pretty early on, given that your first assessment task, your presentation is due on the 24th of March. So you need to pick a question early on, and in fact what I want you to do by next week, you need to really start thinking where, because next week you're going to articulate what your question is that you've decided. Right now you're toying with the ideas and you're doing those forum posts of examples and examples of how you might investigate a question from those EITSL discussion question. So we're getting the ball rolling in that respect. Please let me know if you've got some other questions. It's a great idea if you just put them on the general forum, because if you're wondering something, odds on someone else is wondering the same thing. So that's where we're at. And next week we're going to start narrowing our search in respect, or narrowing our thinking in respect to actually beginning to identify a question that you're going to investigate. And please pick something that is relevant to you as a teacher, because that's the point of this. Thank you. Bye.